For more than a century, humans have built weapons designed for one purpose: to kill the tank. The warheads grew smarter, the explosions grew hotter, and every time the promise was the same: this is the end. Yet every time the world declared the tank dead, it returned to the battlefield. Why did weapons created to end tanks fail? The answer is not in steel. It is in how humans understand war. Before anti-tank weapons existed, the tank was already a problem waiting to happen. Not because it was perfect, but because it broke assumptions. For centuries, infantry had defined the battlefield. Artillery shaped it, cavalry exploited it. War moved at the speed of men and horses. Then steel began to move when tanks first appeared. They were crude, unreliable, and vulnerable. Yet they possessed one terrifying advantage: they crossed ground no one else could. Trenches, wire, mud. Obstacles that had frozen entire armies simply ceased to matter. This was not a technological revolution. It was a psychological one. Military planners quickly understood the danger. If tanks could move freely, defense would collapse. If defense collapsed, wars would be decided too quickly, and by whoever could build the most armor. But the world had no answer yet. Infantry rifles bounced off steel. Machine guns were useless. Artillery could destroy tanks, but only if it could see them and survive long enough to fire. The problem was not that tanks were unstoppable. The problem was that no one knew how to stop them reliably. As the interwar years unfolded, nations faced an uncomfortable truth. Tanks were not an anomaly. They were the future, and futures demand responses. Some nations looked to heavier armor, others to faster tanks. A few began asking a different question entirely. Not how to build better tanks, but how to kill them. That question would reshape modern warfare. Because once a weapon is built to solve a fear, it rarely stops at solving only that fear. And in seeking to end the tank, the world was about to create something far more complicated than a simple countermeasure. It was about to begin a cycle. The idea of killing a tank did not begin with brilliance. It began with anxiety by the late 1920s and early 1930s. Military planners across Europe and beyond were staring at the same problem from opposite sides of the battlefield. Tanks were becoming faster, more reliable, and more numerous. Infantry, once the backbone of armies, was being outpaced. The question was no longer if tanks would dominate future wars. It was how to survive them. Early solutions were improvised and unsatisfying. Large-caliber rifles were issued to infantry units, firing hardened rounds designed to punch through steel at close range. They worked sometimes, but only at distances that bordered on suicidal. The tank survived by forcing the soldier to choose between courage and survival. Others turned to explosives. Ranges were short, fuses were unreliable. Timing was fatal. The act of killing a tank became an intimate encounter. Fought within meters, these were not elegant solutions. They were acts of desperation. Yet, amid this uncertainty, a quiet shift was taking place. In workshops and laboratories, engineers began to realize that steel did not need to be crushed. To be defeated, it could be defeated by focus, by geometry, by directing energy rather than multiplying it. This insight led to the development of shaped charges, warheads that used explosive force to form a concentrated jet, capable of piercing armor far thicker than the weapon itself. It was a revolutionary idea and a dangerous one. At first, many armies dismissed it. The warheads were complex, the physics poorly understood, reliability was questionable. Traditionalists preferred thicker armor and bigger guns. Solutions they could see, measure, and trust. But war has little patience for tradition. As conflicts loomed, nations continued refining these weapons in parallel, often unaware of how close their rivals were to the same conclusions. Germany, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union all walked separate paths toward the same destination: a weapon that could give the infantrymen power over steel. By the eve of the Second World War, the idea had solidified. The tank was no longer just a platform to be counted by artillery or aircraft. It had become a target that could be hunted. And for the first time, it seemed plausible that a single soldier, armed with the right weapon, might stop the advance of armor. It was a seductive promise, one that history would soon put to the test. War does not test ideas gently. It tests them in chaos, fear, and blood. When the Second World War erupted, anti-tank weapons left the proving grounds and entered a battlefield that moved faster than anyone had expected. Tanks were no longer experimental machines. They were mass-produced instruments of maneuver. Driving deep into enemy territory, the moment had arrived for the tank's supposed killers. Early encounters seemed to validate the concept. Anti-tank guns ambushed advancing columns. Infantry teams lay in wait with mines and handheld explosives. At close range, shape-charge weapons proved capable of piercing armor that had once seemed impenetrable. Tanks burned, crews bailed out. The myth of invulnerability shattered. But something else became clear just as quickly. Every successful kill carried a cost. Anti-tank weapons demanded proximity. Proximity demanded exposure. Infantry crews learned that destroying a tank often meant revealing their position, inviting machine gun fire, artillery strikes, or the attention of nearby armor. The battlefield did not pause to reward bravery. Killing one tank rarely stopped the formation behind it. As the war expanded across continents, patterns emerged. Anti-tank weapons were most effective in defense, in ambush, in terrain that restricted movement, in open ground against coordinated armed forces. Their impact diminished rapidly. The weapon worked, the solution did not. Tanks adapted their behavior almost immediately, moving with infantry screens, advancing under artillery cover, coordinating with air support. The battlefield itself began to shift in response. Psychologically, the effect was profound on both sides. Tank crews learned fear, infantry learned limits. The presence of effective anti-tank weapons forced armor to slow, to think, to respect the threat. But it did not remove armor from the battlefield. Instead, it made the tank more cautious and more integrated. What had been conceived as a decisive counter became one factor among many. By the war's end, millions of tanks had been destroyed, and millions more had proven essential to victory. The conclusion was uncomfortable. Anti-tank weapons had not ended the age of the tank. They had simply taught it how to survive. And survival in war is often the first step toward dominance. The tank did not survive the war by chance. It survived by learning. Every battlefield lesson written in burning steel was translated into design, doctrine, and discipline. Anti-tank weapons had exposed the tank's weaknesses. But in doing so, they also revealed how those weaknesses could be managed. Armor, once measured only in thickness, began to change in shape. Sloped surfaces deflected incoming rounds. Internal layouts were redesigned to reduce catastrophic explosions. Survival became an engineering priority, not an afterthought. At the same time, Tanks were no longer sent forward alone. Infantry formations moved closer, screening flanks and rooftops. Engineers cleared mines ahead of advancing columns. Artillery suppressed enemy positions before armor entered the kill zone. The tank became less a lone breakthrough weapon, and more a node within a larger system. This was not adaptation at the level of hardware alone. It was adaptation of thought. Anti-tank weapons, in turn, evolved rapidly. Warheads became more powerful. Launches more portable, engagement ranges extended. The duel between armor and penetrator intensified, each responding to the other in increasingly narrow increments of advantage. Yet the balance never tipped fully in one direction. For every improvement in killing power, there emerged to counter new armor layouts. Better tactics, improved situational awareness. Progress became circular, not decisive. By the early Cold War, this pattern had hardened into doctrine. Anti-tank weapons were no longer expected to end armored warfare. They were expected to delay it, shape it, and make it costly. Tanks, meanwhile, were designed with the assumption that they would be hit, and that they must keep fighting anyway. Survivability replaced invulnerability as the goal. What emerged was a paradox. The more effective anti-tank weapons became, the more valuable tanks proved themselves to be. Because they absorbed punishment that would have destroyed any other platform. The battlefield had not chosen a winner. It had chosen a relationship. One defined not by elimination, but by continuous adaptation. There is rarely a single moment when warfare changes. But there are moments when illusions collapse. By the late Cold War, military planners on both sides faced an uncomfortable realization. No matter how advanced anti-tank weapons became, the tank was not disappearing. In fact, it was becoming more central to battlefield planning than ever before. This was the turning point. Not technological, but conceptual. The breakthrough did not come from a deadlier warhead. It came from understanding that tanks were no longer individual machines to be hunted, but systems to be protected, supported, and networked. Armor doctrine shifted decisively toward combined arms, an approach where tanks, infantry, artillery, air power, and intelligence moved as a single organism. In this environment, anti-tank weapons lost their promise of decisiveness. They could destroy a vehicle. They could not collapse the system. Technological innovation followed this realization. Composite armor replaced simple steel. Explosive reactive armor emerged, not to make tanks invulnerable, but to disrupt the very physics anti-tank weapons relied upon. Later, active protection systems would go further, intercepting incoming threats before impact. The tank was no longer merely enduring attack. It was responding to it for the first time. Defense became dynamic. Anti-tank weapons still penetrated. Tanks still died, but the balance of expectation shifted. Losses were anticipated, managed, and absorbed within operational planning. The battlefield stopped asking whether tanks could survive. It began asking how many were needed to achieve an objective. This was the moment when the end of the tank quietly vanished from serious military thought. Not because anti-tank weapons had failed technically, but because they had failed strategically. They could punish armor, they could not replace it. And once that truth was accepted, the future of armored warfare was no longer in doubt. The cycle had become permanent.